There are so many factors that impact the well-being of law enforcement officers, from wellness topics and developmental content to organizational expectations and social connections. RippleWorks solves that problem by providing anonymous check-ins, so each officer can get exactly what they need and want for prime performance, while agencies learn in real time how their people are doing through analytic dashboards. Take a look at RippleWorks today at www.rippleworks.com and schedule a demo. That's RippleWorks, WORX.com. Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. For a thorough conversation on how Tire Tag can help your agency and revenue collection, visit episode 204. That's 204. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities.
But then there needs to be that core set of standards or qualities, I should say, in each applicant that we need to do the job. Empathy is a huge one. That's why I'm such a huge fan of emotional intelligence. There's a reason that organizations across the world are not only vetting new applicants, but also internal applicants for promotion for their emotional intelligence. If you don't have emotional intelligence, you're not developing your emotional intelligence and focusing on that, then your career is likely to flatline in the next 5 years. Because agencies in law enforcement and then again in the corporate world, emotional intelligence is one of the most sought after skills that is out there.
Yeah, I think people are still resistant, but I think we're getting there. I can think of exact faces and names that were like, oh, what is this garbage? Emotional intelligence, right? And like, they want me to kumbaya and talk my feelings, right? I think we're past that. I think people understand what it is, but I still don't think that a lot of people are giving it the credit. And if we just call it what it is, it's people skills. A lot of people, I think a lot of really confident cops would like to say they have good people skills, they have good communication skills, they can read people well, they're aware of their own feelings and thoughts. And so if you boil it down to that, that's what it is. And so if we recognize that there's an opportunity for more training, hopefully people are getting over that, I guess maybe the ignorance of what it might be. So let's stay on that though. On EQ, I think that because there is a increasing awareness of that when you're talking about selection, when you're talking about promotion, sometimes there is a lack of that. Many people call it that leadership quality. And I think that when you're talking about leading a team, a lot of times it does come down to EQ, right? Like, do I know how I'm coming off? Am I compelling? Do I have credibility? Do I have influence based on not just what I know, but how I communicate with my team? I want to get your gentleman's sense on that prompt. And then also, like, how do we evaluate from that? How do we, if it's an entry level, how do you suss that out? And or for promotion or special team selection, how do you quantify that? Because so much of that could be a civil service kind of a hurdle or hiccup sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to test for EQ. There's actually an online test that you can do. Dr. Bradbury, who's one of the great founders and improvers of emotional intelligence, has a test online that you can do. And the cool thing about emotional intelligence is it can be developed at any age, and it can always be improved. So, yeah, I mean, coming from a union shop and having been, part of the union and negotiating contracts and that kind of stuff, I understand the civil service side of that. But again, it's not a pass fail. We want a certain level of emotional intelligence, and then knowing that we can build upon that, invest in that person a little bit, and improve their emotional intelligence. Because all emotional intelligence is recognizing and being aware of your own emotions and being able to manage them, and then recognizing that other people have their own emotions and letting them have their experience and respecting that. That's really emotional intelligence in a nutshell. So it's not woo-woo, right? It's not all this, patchouli oil smoke, Birkenstock type stuff. Um, it's science. And the beautiful thing about neuroscience and neuroplasticity is you can't develop this. Like it's a skill that you can build over time. And what I learned most about myself was through emotional intelligence. When I went through my own processes of recovering from 22 years in law enforcement, when I started to learn more about myself, I started to recognize more in other people, and I became
Mhm.
much more empathetic. And it's recognizing where people are at, seeing where they are, meeting them where they are, and then being able to relate, right, and work with them. And again, when we start talking about the difference of perspectives and all that kind of stuff, we start really getting down into the deep dirty, the root cause of this stuff. Um, there's a whole lot of other stuff to unpack when you start talking about teams and integrating into other people into your teams and thoughts and perspectives, and having those conversations like you talked about, where you're vetting things out and kicking around ideas and brainstorming, and why people are averse to that. There's a whole lot to, I mean, that's a whole nother session. But
Yeah.
EQ is it's one of those skills that is sharpened all the time. And it's not a tool that you keep in your desk drawer or in your duty belt. It's actually something you take home with you and you use it in your entire life, and it improves your personal and your professional life. It's not just something you keep at work.
Yeah, thanks for putting that out. And it's you. It's basically how do you function and navigate your life in the world in a way, right? So it's not just on your tool belt. You just live with it, or you choose to, right? And so I love when you said made that point about neuroplasticity, right? That ability to learn and change and grow. And for those that are probably not people listening to the show, to be honest, and I'm very well aware of the target audience, probably not people that as the blockers, but potentially people on your team, in your department, are those types. And if they don't believe it's a thing and has value, and they don't think they can learn it or improve it, then they're absolutely correct. And if you believe that you can learn and improve it, then you're absolutely correct. And that's kind of the power of it. Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, really, it's about how you perceive the environment in which you're working in. So, I worked down in South Central on 77th Division. I was there for the Rodney King riots, and I saw some very critical historical moments in Los Angeles policing where the community hated the police. I was fortunate. My father was a sociology professor, and he actually, when he got his PhD, did his dissertation on law enforcement. So he kind of had a good idea of what I was experiencing. But when I'd think I had everything figured out, I'd run things by him, and to learn that, goodness, I haven't even scraped the surface of my understanding of things. And that's where it's really important. It's about your understanding of what you're perceiving and being exposed to. That's a real challenge in law enforcement, because we become oftentimes very insular. You see it's like, well, if you're not in law enforcement, then you're nobody. If you're not the LAPD, then you're nobody. If you're not LAPD 77th Division, you're nobody. If you're not Morning Watch 77th Division, you're nobody. And then you're looking at your partner and going, everybody's an idiot except for us. And it can get that, insular. And the reality is that we have to continually struggle against that. And, I saw a study recently, I believe it was in Denmark, where between the ages of 6 and 16, they have weekly classes on empathy. And as a result, what's the result? They have the lowest rates of bullying and the highest scores on kindness. And, that's interesting, because what do you talk about school shootings? Like here in the United States, it's really an American problem. We have 57 times more school shootings than all other G7 countries combined. And it's a unique problem that we have here in this country. And bullying is one of the primary things that leads to that type of violence in schools. So, I just really, that caught my attention. But that's because it's about emotional intelligence. It's about understanding people where they are. And it may be very different than the experiences that you had growing up. I learned it on the fly. I didn't understand, Nickerson Gardens and all these projects down in the South End. Completely different culture. But at the end of the day, humans are all driven by the exact same emotions. And it's important to understand that. And that if not for the fortuitous situation of being raised in the situation that I was in the environment I was in, I very well have maybe been the guy that ran the Rolling 60s gang. It just, that's something that you have to come to terms with, that there's more that more that makes us similar than dissimilar when you're talking about people, regardless of whether you're in law enforcement or you're a hardcore gangster. So it's really about how you perceive the environment you're in. And the one thing that really has bothered me about law enforcement is this: I got paid every other Wednesday. No one had to thank me. I couldn't believe I was getting paid to do the job. It was unbelievable experience. Do it again. And even though all the challenges and self-sacrifices that come with it, I wouldn't change a thing. But I never saw myself as a victim of society's perspective of me and how they saw me and painted me with a broad brush. I always saw that as an opportunity to reach out and prove them wrong, and to try to make a difference and close that gap. In law enforcement, like right now, we're just seeing a lot of this divisiveness. And some of it's driven from the political climate right now, but it's really hurting law enforcement. And I'm even seeing law enforcement turn on itself, where people are buying into some of the stuff they're being told. And I know a lot of people that are in like the DC Police Department, and they're good people. They're working hard. They're doing the best they can with the limited resources that they have. And it just kills me that they're being thrown under the bus. And they're being thrown under the bus oftentimes by other law enforcement professionals. And I don't get it. Because given the proper resources, they would be doing better. But I've kind of gone off topic, I suppose.
No, you're great. I think, man, I just want to rewind a little bit to what you said about, if not for your upbringing, not for some of the environment that you got to have and be a part of, you could see yourself maybe interacting in a gang lifestyle. And I might have said this on the show before, but I recall years and years ago, kind of in the middle of the night, having those kind of conversations you do in the substation, like these deep philosophical deep dives when no one should be awake, but we all are, of course. Where I said something to that effect. I said, there's so much drive and there's so much passion in the people that choose to do this job. It makes me wonder, like, how much of us, like, we commit, we're willing to risk a lot for what we care about. But I also wonder how many of, like, us hard-headedness and the things that we're around, like, how many of us in a different scenario could be in that scenario. And I did the same kind of conversation. And one of my buddies was like, oh, for sure. Like, he's like, I didn't make all the best choices, but if I didn't have what I had, he did the same. He could see himself going down the same line. And someone else just about left the room because they're like, how dare you insinuate that I could, values and this and that. I'm like, it's not really commentary on that. It's just more of like, circumstance, and not excusing bad behavior, but just trying to, as I see it, you being able to do that exercise, Jeff, is a huge exercise in empathy, right? It's just to recognize, like, people are people and we're in the people business and we're dealing with people in some of our worst moments. The next point I want to focus in on is that discussion of victimhood and victim mentality. And I agree. I've been asked a handful of times in the last couple of years, either just by someone in the community, like, hey, what can we do to support you? You guys don't have what you need. And I'm like, okay, like, and I have general responses, but even on like someone else's podcast a couple of times, I said, like, the biggest challenge facing law enforcement is ourselves. We bully each other. We talk smack as soon as someone leaves the room. And these are supposed to be our, like, our proud few. Like, we already have these uphill battles. We already have all these challenges, not enough people of the right people. And then the people that are right next to us when stuff hits the fan, they're not good enough, right? So I think so much of that is so true, where we don't need more parades and accolades and things like that. We need more support. And you spoke to that too, like real tangible support. And I think that comes with understanding, and even you calling an opportunity to prove people wrong, like prove the doubters wrong. And I think that there's such a healthy energy you can have behind that, whether it's people in your department or whether it's people in the community. Like, no, I'm gonna police with values and in a humble way, not in an oppressive way, not with a chip on my shoulder trying to, spin you up and win the day, but just to say, like, I know why I do the job and I will demonstrate that. And by virtue of that, slowly, surely, hopefully build that positive culture and positive relationship. I do want to turn it back over to Bill, but I also want, because we've circled a couple times around what the Scandinavians are doing. I've always found it fascinating as far as what they are doing in the education system and such. And I don't know that much, but it sounds like you both know a bit about how they approach the selection process with law enforcement or some of their cultural things. So I'd love both of you to kind of speak on that. And for those listeners that might have a little bit of a fixed mindset to say, well, okay, we are not them. We don't have any, we have a way different society. Absolutely. But also, I want to nod to earlier in the conversation when we said, hey, there's so much we can learn from outside of industry. There's so much we can learn from outside of country. And we just have to adapt it. Like, the work is ours to do. It's a lot of work, but you can take little things and adapt them in a context that makes sense. And so, I mean, I can think of a couple of programs that really do try to build that pipeline early. Think about explorers, cadets, this and that, for people that might be wondering where I'm going. But yeah, do either of you have more that you could share about selection process rather than that theme of deselection that we see?
You know, one of the great ways, and it's actually how I came into law enforcement, was the reserve program.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows people, not only allows the agency to get a good idea of who the person is and how capable they are, and how trainable they are, but it also gives the person an idea, introduction to what the job really looks like from the inside, right? Not what they're seeing on TV or what they're hearing from other people. And even from inside, right? Like you said, we are cannibalizing ourselves. We have people out there who are supposed to be recruiting good ambassadors for our departments, and they're out there, bashing the industry instead, just waiting people from joining. So yeah, those early programs like the Explorers and the Reserve programs, and even getting into the educational process, getting into the high schools, getting into the junior colleges, or even the colleges and universities, and start doing some more of like an ROTC type program, where people get an exposure to it, because maybe they don't want to be a frontline, knuckle dragging cop right out there, but they could see going into the industry and then going into forensics, right, or some other avenue within the organization, because we need to develop all of those. So, like you said, Eric, we're not going to become Norway. It's not going to happen. But there are a lot of things we can learn by looking at how other people do things and go, how can we implement even just a fraction of that in our system? Even just the mindset change sometimes can make that huge change, can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Jeff?
Well, I think what's key is that we have to recognize that one size does not fit all. 70% of law enforcement agencies here in the United States, police communities 10,000 or less. And my experience was, LAPD, and then prior to that, I did 3 years at the LA County Sheriff's before I went over to LAPD. But, so I saw it from a personal standpoint, large law enforcement agency. And what would apply with LAPD would certainly not apply in the community I live in, where there's 4,100 people. We have our own police department. It's very different. But that doesn't mean that the things that were done in LA in some way, shape, or form can't benefit what they're doing here. And that the lessons we learned in LA can't be used here to avoid, a tragedy or whatever. That being said, it's about seeing what we can use from success stories outside of this country and apply it to our policing circumstance. And it goes to a much larger conversation where you talk about perhaps a completely different staffing model for law enforcement. From a large law enforcement perspective, working with the LAPD and the LA County Sheriff's Department, you would be so shocked and surprised with the number of sworn personnel that are doing jobs that have absolutely nothing to do with your training and experience. The reality is we can be a heck of a lot leaner and meaner in regards to the people that we would have on the job that are doing actual police work. And perhaps why not hire people? For instance, you have a rape that happened yesterday. There's no suspect present, and the victim showered, and you're going to tie up an entire unit, 2 officers in the city of Los Angeles, for the rest of the day to conduct this investigation. When, quite frankly, they don't even know what the next question should be in their interview. And, why not hire people that would fill those roles? So then you're out there fighting the crime in real time, mm-hmm. and having people that have the expertise and the better knowledge and background and education to fulfill that other role, which would be that investigative side. And people are like, oh, no, we can't do it. Well, just because we've always done it a certain way doesn't mean we can't consider amending things, how we do things. And those are the types of things that need to be considered, not only in how we hire, but how many do we really need to hire? You look at studies that have been done. I believe it was in Milwaukee. They said hire 131 civilians and 16 sworn when they did this assessment of the roles. And if not, they were going to have to hire like 127 sworn. Well, you're going to get a heck of a lot better quality people if you're only hiring 16 sworn versus 127. And then you're going to specialize with those civilians that are filling that those other positions that don't require you to carry a gun and to have all the training that we have.
Yeah, it's another way of us fighting ourselves. And this came up in small ways, in some ways, when you look at civilian level work and a lot of the stuff. Like, I think most people can agree with this. Most officers don't want to handle like cold reports. It's just info gathering. And I've heard many people say, like, what am I, a secretary? Like, you can do it online, but then the online ones need to be reformatted and there's grammar, there's system things. And so it ties up a human being. But so many times we are trying to use this, as we said, what an average police officer should be is a highly trained generalist, though, right? So I'm saying these things that kind of compete, right? Highly trained because the risks matter. You have to know all these different things. You have to know tactics and it's life or death, but also like, let's not violate anyone's civil rights. And that takes a lot of knowing and awareness and knowledge based and also communication. So like, just to be dangerous enough, just to be useful enough, you got to know all these things. And it's so hard to select for these things and find the people and then train them. And then we're going to tie them up with this like clerical work, right? And if it's like a union, like, kind of work thing, it's like, man, a lot of times that no cops want to be doing that anyway. So like, why don't we want to do more cop stuff? Let's not just put out the union hat on just to put it on, and recognize there's a lot of people that want to help in these different ways, but they might not have the physicality. They might not have the any desire to do these things, right? And I love that just aspect of thinking outside the box, because even for someone that was devil's advocate would say, well, it happened earlier, but what about now? It's okay, like, did the victim come to the station? If not, why don't we get an officer to help transport them down to the station? So you clear the apartment, you make sure it's safe, all that, and then they're just with an investigator, right, in a safe, sterile environment. So again, if you're immediately reacting to anything in this conversation, like, oh, I couldn't do that because XYZ, just pause, just sit with it, and ask yourself, why not? And I think that could be. Those are two very powerful words together. Why not? And I have it on a sticky note, and I think at my desk, and I think that I should probably like frame it just to remind myself more overtly, because we all get in a rut and we all get in the systems of thinking and bureaucracies and all that. But that's the point of the show and thought leaders like yourselves sharing in this conversation. There are a few things of that we've kind of poked at, but I know that these are huge conversations. Where the original theme of the episode was professionalism and performance for selection and kind of new officers and building and training them. We've gone to literally departments and organizational culture and the profession, like the capital P profession at large. So I'd like to play with a little bit of a quick fire if you're both down for it. I've done this a couple times, different episodes, but really what we're going for is the challenge of dialing it down to like a couple words or ideas, like 2 or 3. You both down for that?
Sure.
From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court-ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is CJIS compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. To hear details about all the applications of Ditto Transcripts and exactly why this is a key solution for your organization's workload issues, check out episode 232. Okay, we'll start easy. So we're going to go back and forth. So what was your favorite assignment in your law enforcement career? Jeff?
I worked Metropolitan Division. That was like our SWAT and our K-9, Special Forces department.
Oh, K-9? Bill too?
Yeah,
you were K-9.
K-9. K-9, 5 years. Yep. Best 5 years of my career.
Okay, so that was also your favorite?
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah, K-9 myself here. I know there's a reason why this all works out so well. Okay, what is the biggest thing, the biggest challenge facing law enforcement today? Jeff?
I think some undue criticism.
Bill?
Yeah, along that same line, I'd say leadership. We need to get the right people. Get the right people on the bus, but then put them in the right seat.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the next one's going to be, we talk about traits, like selecting for traits or building those traits. What are the 2 or 3 or 1 to 3 of your top traits you think officers need to focus on selecting, and then candidates that hear that reflect on that? Jeff?
Critical thinking and moral reasoning.
Bill.
I'd say flexibility and curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And man, there's a cool way that you can intersect those. Okay. What do you think officers need more training in? Jeff?
De-escalation.
Bill?
You cut out right at the end of that question.
Oh, what do you think officers need more training in?
Emotional intelligence. I'm a huge emotional intelligence fan.
Yeah, and those there's a strong overlap there too.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, what do more law enforcement leaders need to recognize?
That they don't know everything.
Love that. Hence the point of the
Yeah.
show is I'm actively learning all the time from people like you. Bill?
Yeah, same thing. They just need to realize that they don't know it all, and they're just as human as all the people that they're responsible for.
Yeah. All right. Next question. What do you wish you had more of in the mid part of your law enforcement career? Jeff?
I wish I would have had a better work-life balance.
Yeah, that's legit. I get that sense that you're a doer, still doing it. Nice. Bill?
I would say better leadership. Mid career, I was definitely swimming in toxicity.
Yeah, it's part of the. I would agree for myself. Just kind of in the mid career years too. Just a little bit passive. You do the 32-year math for me, but yes, work life balance, the illusion of that, but work life management for sure. And then also, I will make a plug that that's a lot of why I do what I do is because sometimes you don't just get leadership, better leadership, or let's say different, more helpful leadership for you or for the team, which is really where I have the concept of, leading yourself and trying to build those kinds of articles and conversations on this show, and put that training out too.
Yeah, and I'm also
Excellent.
thankful for not having that leadership because it tested me and it
Yes.
improved me as a person. Like I went inward and built myself. It was definitely helped me.
That's the thing. I wonder sometimes if there's a lot of amazing leaders, some that I know personally and regionally, and then that come on the show. And I wonder if there are any that would think that they didn't have a really corrosive, toxic, overbearing, tyrannical leader that they had to learn through and self-develop, and that made them who they are. Thoughts on that, Jeff? This is away from the quick fire, but do you think that's a thing?
Yeah. Oh, of course. I mean, it began when you're a probationary officer and you have different training officers and characteristics and personality traits that you liked and said, I want to emulate that. And then there's like, that I don't want to be. It starts early on in your career, all the way through to, I worked for 3 separate chiefs directly, and they all had good and bad characteristics and things that I learned from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
What do you do to help de-stress and support your wellness? Jeff?
Workout.
What kind of workout?
Most recently, I was a CrossFitter. I used to compete in CrossFit. I was really about top 10 in the world, 50 to 54-year-olds.
No big deal. You can hear the humility. It's awesome. Bill, how about yourself?
I get outside. Outdoors is my place. That's why I live where I do, because I can walk outside my door here and I'm out in the middle of some of the most beautiful country in the world.
Nice. That's a side note. My observation is both of you are not only have survived law enforcement, but thriving. You're both retired, or I like to say fake retired, where you can hear the conviction, you can hear the investment in the law enforcement profession, still very much doing your thing as leaders, which is all a credit to, and also I see healthy looking, vibrant men across the screen from me. So I'm like, I think that there's so much that we that are active need to learn and observe from those that are retired well, right? And so I love that. I suspected that was a huge part of both of your lives. And so thank you for sharing that. Final question in this quick fire will be, what should people do to prepare for retirement? Jeff?
You have to be aware of where you stand with your mental health, because it's, I'm shocked with the number of friends that I have that are struggling with PTSD and things. And it's not from what we would traditionally think, being in a gun battle, all that sort of thing. It's, oftentimes it's circumstances where it's just sadness. You see your cup gets full, and over 25, 30-year career, when you walk away from it, there's just a lot of sadness that you have to deal with. And, I'm not immune to that either. So it's interesting. And then oftentimes it's poor leadership where people have a sense that their organizations have turned on them. and weren't supportive. And, there's about 600 officers a year or 200 officers a year that kill themselves, versus 60 that get killed by a suspect. So, there's a real issue here that we've made a lot of good strides, but we need to make a lot more improvements to start taking care of our own and making it okay to say, I'm not okay, whether it's during your career, but even surprisingly after your career, the number of people that struggle, I'm surprised. I'm actually shocked.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Jeff. And make no mistake that, yeah, I mean, I think we've all been through a critical incident, the three of us. But yes, the corrosive nature and seeing how it can affect someone the hard calls, the kid calls, the death by 1,000 cuts, the organizational betrayal, right? Like, you better believe that it takes a toll if somebody at work thinks daily when they go in, they're going to get served IA papers just because of how they relate to the bosses and how their career has been. So absolutely. Bill, what are your thoughts on prepping for retirement?
Yeah, it's, Jeff makes such a great point, and it's a big piece of why I do what I do now. You got to prepare. You can't think that you're just going to hang up the duty belt and you're going to walk out the door and life's going to be amazing. You've got to prepare for it. And if you don't start unpacking that emotional backpack during your career, it's going to come crashing down around your ears, and you're going to have to deal with it in retirement. And, as Jeff hinted at, or talked about, so many people feel like they were left behind and, their agency abandoned them. When honestly, it's just they went on to retirement and they're just not in that circle anymore. So they've got to mentally prepare for that transition to, whatever retirement looks like for them. Whether they're going to go into a corporate career, they're going to go into entrepreneur world, or they're going to go fishing. They've got to start unpacking that stuff and dealing with it well beyond. You look at these retirement plans that do these webinars and seminars for people to prepare financially, for their retirement. It's like, well, let's start weaving in the rest of that piece, right? Because when you leave the job, you're still carrying all that baggage with you, and until you empty that emotional backpack, you really don't have the freedom that you look for. And like Jeff said, the stats don't lie. I have a lot of friends that have been, done very well in retirement and are very happy in retirement, but I know a lot of people that absolutely suffer in retirement, and are just battling, silently, hoping that it's all going to get better, or miraculously it's going to go away. It's not. We need to do better at the beginning. Like, go back to where we started this conversation: is the vetting and the hiring and the training. We need to start teaching that stuff, at academy level, right? So they go through their entire career with much better skill set to manage this stuff and decompress over time and deal with the stuff as it comes up in a timely manner, instead of stuffing it into that emotional backpack, carrying it, for the rest of their years, and 30 years, they're burned out, former shell of themselves, wondering which direction is up.
Yeah. You need to be trained to recognize and acknowledge that what you're feeling or going through is absolutely normal, and that it's not a weakness, and you have to deal with it in that time and place. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations, you don't want to disclose things to, because they will view you as damaged goods. And there needs to be some improvements. Dallas Police Department's done a fabulous job. If you look into the stuff that they're doing for their personnel relative to mental health and substance abuse and those sorts of things, 20 to 30% of law enforcement officers have substance abuse issues, compared to about 10% of the general public. I mean, it's a significant issue. That's all that is they're masking something else, dealing with, and it needs to be handled on the front end. And part of that is the emotional intelligence to recognize something, have the personal insight to say, I need some help, and then the organization being able to provide that for you in a constructive way where it's confidential and you're comfortable moving forward and getting the help you need. So that's a whole nother conversation. We could talk about that for another hour.
Absolutely. And it is absolutely, but I'm glad you both offered a lot of themes and tangible insights, because that's what I was going to say. Hey, this is worth having a little bit more discussion. I was like, what do you mean? So I would be remiss if people heard some of those offerings and then it was like, well, what did both these experts recommend we do? And I hear a lot of emphasis on wellness, education, emotional intelligence, right? But then also, like, how do you unpack that backpack? And that quote unquote wellness and stress management, that looks different for a lot of people, but there are a lot of prongs and themes that you can offer and socialize and support as leaders, as the industry, teaching that from the beginning, selecting for that, but then also teaching, training that all the way through. And I think that there are more agencies or states that are injecting a little bit at the beginning, but then you hit FTO, you hit the ground running, now you're in it. And then are we maintaining that? Or are we reminding people? Or is Dr. Gilmartin's work just something they're handed in academy and they flip through one time? Are we seeing that apply and start to manifest in our own lives? And then I think another thing to have people think about is that identity piece. This becomes such a prevailing beyond a job, beyond a profession, beyond a calling sometimes, and it's like the lifestyle. It is life. You just look at things differently, and how do we manage that? I mean, it goes back to what you both already said, which is working on all those tangible things you can work on. It's a
Right.
lot, though.
The one thing I would advise is that, I was an elite hockey player. I played Division I college hockey on scholarship. And the one thing that I really emphasized in college was making sure that I had relationships with people outside of the hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't allow hockey to define me. And I carried that into my law enforcement career, where I spent the vast majority of my time off duty with people that had nothing to do with law enforcement. And it helped me because it exposed me to different perspectives. I could talk to them. You didn't have like a group think or this, just the continual, oh, let's have a beer over this problem. And that wasn't the solution to things. I would just encourage people that you can't allow being a law enforcement officer to define you. It's part of who you are, but it doesn't define who you are. And if you do that, then your retirement will be better. You won't feel like you've lost a part of who you are. It's what you do. It's not who you are. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, staying grounded in that reality, right? And if have those people that are outside the public safety. I mean, don't hang out with a bunch of firefighters, right? Because that's the same ilk. Right, nothing against firefighters.
Nothing against, yeah, I was gonna say. He's saying it's too similar. Yeah.
Yeah, or jailers or anybody else, right? Like get outside that family, Jeff, and like you said, man, having an anchor, having a root in that reality of the rest of society, so we don't lose that perspective of how things really work in the world, and we don't get so sullied and let that suck us in. It's hugely important.
Yeah, fully agree. I've shared many times. I started going in that like everything was cop, cop, cop. In my early mid-20s, all like, and the shift, the lifestyle. It makes it easy to hang out with your work buddies. It makes it hard to hang out with your non-work buddies. But if you're hearing this, just like any other part of the conversation, if you're like, I can't because, why not? Right? Pause, hit the pause button. Your challenge, your invitation is why not? And speaking from my own experience, if you feel like you can't, then you probably should. So think on that, reflect, and like, what is the goal? And I think that's one thing I didn't actually state. I wrote down way earlier in the conversation for all these prongs that Bill and Jeff injected, which is whether we're talking about hiring, whether we're talking about selection, self-development, stress management, like what is the goal? Like, what are we trying to do? And think about that. And that is to live and serve better, not just as a cop, but just as people in this greater scheme of things. So, man, I so appreciate both of your insights. I do want to give you both an opportunity to tell people where they can find you, what you're working on, books, training, consulting, coaching, right? And so please, and then anything you'd like to leave the listeners with. So Jeff, do you want to go first?
Sure. I can be found on social media. If you go to Jeff Wenniger on LinkedIn or Facebook, you can find me there. I post multiple times a week, write a number of articles and things about many of these topics that we're talking about. I also have a forthcoming book that's coming out next Tuesday on the 16th, September 16th. It's called On Thin Ice. If you go to onthinicebook.com, you can get put on the emailing list. And by doing that, you can become part of a opportunity to be selected each week. I do a drawing, and I have a VIP swag box where there's a hardcover signed copy of the book, as well as some other gifts that are influenced by the contents of the book that you can win. Yeah, I encourage people to read it. People often ask me, who's your target audience? The answer really is everybody. Whether you're a suburban housewife, you're currently in law enforcement, you're a law enforcement leader, or you're a legislator, there's something in there for you to contemplate. It challenges law enforcement. It's about dialogue and having the tough conversations, but it's about figuring out a path forward where we're going to be the most successful because I bleed blue. I love law enforcement. I want it to be successful moving forward in the 21st century.
Excellent. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Jeff. Over to you, Bill.
Yeah, mostly spend my time on LinkedIn, a little bit of Facebook time. If you want to get a hold of me, LinkedIn is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I'm actually in the process of writing my first book, and hopefully it'll be out early
Hey,
2026.
nice.
And I have a working title, but I'm going to hold that back and let people wonder. And just released my Clear Protocol coaching program, which focuses on helping agencies and individuals develop their emotional intelligence and become healthier, better leaders, dealing with leadership first inside ourselves. And the best advice I can give anybody is stay curious, and kind of like your question, Eric. But I would take it one more step forward and say, when you start having those negative, when you start doubting and you have those negative thoughts, ask yourself what else could be true. I love asking my clients that, like, what else could be true when they're in that doomsday Eeyore mindset. What else could be true? And it's pretty amazing what you find when you start to explore that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love what else could be true, or how do you know, or like, are you sure?
Hmm.
Man, the limitations we put on ourselves, or we just accept. Man, can't open that can of worms or treats, as we could go back into the second hour. Yeah, so thank you both so much. I'm extremely grateful to have both of your expertise, your insights, experiences to share with everyone else.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.